Everybody, about to have another mocktails conversation with my guy George Johnson, author George Johnson. So super excited. It's gonna be a real good conversation. So make sure you guys get ready and tune in. Can you guys hear me? I don't know. You know, I always ask, where you guys coming from? See, Virginia. Where else? That's what's up. Where everybody coming in from? Thailand, what's going on? Can you hear? Oh, y'all can hear me? Make sure. I don't know if these headphones is working or not. Hopefully. Tennessee, okay. Awesome. I want to make sure. I don't know if I can hear inside here or not. George,
Hey,
what's going on? How are you?
I'm pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing all right, doing good. Can you hear me? I'm trying to make sure. I got these new things and I don't know if they work properly or not.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. How's your day going?
Pretty good. I just have a lot of writing primarily that I'm doing. So
Okay.
yeah, just a lot of writing.
Perfect. All right, guys. So um we're gonna get started, guys. Thank you guys for joining us for another one of our mocktails conversations. Of course, you guys know what mocktails is. It's men of color telling their stories. And we have a super dope guest today, Mr. George Johnson, and author, journalist, writer, do it all. And we just a blessing to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And we're just gonna have some real good conversation. You
Yeah,
ready
thanks
for
for
it?
having me. No, I'm excited.
Of course. And have we met before? I feel like we have,
I mean, I've
but
been
I can't
around.
remember.
I've been around. Like I was in DC for a few years, and
Okay.
you're in where Atlanta
I'm
or
in New York.
New York. Okay.
Yeah.
I've lived in New York, the New York area the past 3 years. So I'm
Okay.
sure between like Native Sun events or
Right.
some of those other events,
Right.
we've seen each other.
For sure. And just to give a little background for everybody, I already said you're you're author and we're going to talk about your book here, but also what's your background just for people that don't know?
Yeah. Before I went into journalism, I actually worked in higher education.
Nice.
I uh, worked in finance, Virginia Union University, which is also my alma mater. I
Okay.
was the director of student accounts. I also worked at Georgetown University, doing finance as running their student accounts
Nice.
department. Then I transitioned in like the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, directly into HIV work. And when I was doing my HIV work, that was when I started writing a little bit heavier. And
Okay.
so I was doing direct services in HIV work. And then I just transitioned from direct services in HIV work to doing writing primarily in about 2017. And so since then, uh, you know, writing for like all of the magazines, Teen Vogue
Hmm.
and Essence and
Hmm.
you name it, BET, NBC. And then I finally started writing my first book in 2018, which came out this year and
Nice.
is doing pretty well.
Nice. And you have a specific, for the most part, like a little niche in terms of your writing, right? You like kind of specific to Black experience and living Black lives, right?
Yeah, I mean, my writing always centers Black people, but
Okay.
primarily culture, race, gender, identity. HIV, I've written a lot around HIV and the epidemic. But yeah, those are my main focuses in terms of what I still currently write anytime I do freelance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So he also said Virginia Union University. He is also my frat brother. So I went to school Lynchburg College. So I'm pretty sure you heard of that, a little school out there. But
Yeah.
yeah, man. So that's awesome. So we're here, author. Again, you said your book just came out, and it is All Boys Aren't Blue.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, so I mean, my book is called All Boys Aren't Blue. It is a young adult Black queer memoir. Alpha Phi Alpha. Somebody asked which one.
I saw that.
It is a young adult Black queer memoir discussing my life from birth until about the age of 21, focusing on my adolescent years growing up in New Jersey, as well as my college years going to Virginia Union University. The book primarily centers on my coming to terms with my identity, my learning of my identity, my balancing safety, balancing living in a society that was, built in this hetero norms, while I was also trying to figure out and understand who I truly was and what I was becoming. And it also centers my family and discusses what it's like when you have a Black family that, like mine, that really, really loved on me. I wasn't disposed of, even though we didn't necessarily always have the right language or the right terms or knew what was going on. My family really, really loved on me very, very hard. And so, I'm who I am today because of that. And so that's what the book primarily discusses, all of that journey.
So you said you started in 2018, you started the book. So it took you about a year? How long did it take you to write it?
2 years. I started the end of January 2018, and we officially finished January of 2020 with like the full the full book. It's a lot of edits. It takes a while. Where you start is definitely not where you end. So it can take some time in the book writing process.
So this book is, again, you say it's about your story. What was that process, because again, I read the intro, just got a little piece of it, before our call, but, you talk about some very detailed conversations and detailed things that happened in your life. What was that process for you, kind of picking and choosing what you spoke about, trying to get as much as you can, because you've been on this earth, I would say more than 25 years. I don't know your age, but at least more than 25 years.
Right.
But being able to, was that hard for you to kind of pick and choose those particular experiences? I know you had to speak with your family members about them just to kind of, get your memory. Well, some stuff you couldn't remember, but to get their feedback on it as well.
Yeah. So, I'll be 35 this year. And so picking and choosing the stories is always interesting, because I think once you start to choose the stories, this book centered me. So most of the stories primarily were about what I was going through, what I was dealing with, what I was feeling, and then how the people who were around me, how all those things kind of formulated the spaces that I was entering and navigating. And it wasn't easy to pick all of the stories, because sometimes it's you're balancing, how much do I give of myself? How much do I keep to myself? Do I want to keep anything to myself? If I were writing an adult memoir, meaning it was specifically going to be geared towards adults, I think I would have probably written it much differently. Writing a young adult memoir, knowing that this was going to potentially end up in school systems, that this was going to end up in the hands of 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 12-year-olds who were like myself, I knew I had to go a step further. I knew I had to make sure that I was able to push myself past even my own boundaries, so that they too could feel seen in the pages and understand what they may have been going through. So I had to it was almost over explaining, and also really going into my mind and giving them what I was thinking at the time, not just the experience, but what I was thinking to get through the experience. And so when it came to story selection, for me, it wasn't as much about the story as much as it was about the story and the intersection of theory and theory and principles and the lessons that I also wanted to teach.
Right.
And so it was trying to find that balance of which stories would be best to teach which lessons I want to teach.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I went about it. And as you said, you're talking about family, you're talking about all of these things. So sometimes it can be a little bit tough because, you're telling stuff that they may not know, or they may not agree with, or they may not understand. But in my case, it was pretty easy. I was able to talk to my mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles about everything I was going to write before it came out. So it wasn't some shock to them. They just knew they were going to probably read some things they hadn't known about. But I think in the end, it turned out fine as far as my family was concerned. And even as far as family, friends, and everything was concerned. But it was, the story selection was about the lessons that I needed the kids to understand. And so that's kind of what guided where I was going.
So it's so interesting a lot of times, you said the book was about you telling your story about, your upbringing and being a queer man, and trying to, develop yourself into that. And so many times it's like, okay, this person's part of LGBTQ, this is cisgender, we're not the same. What are some experiences, or excuse me, not even experiences, experiences or obstacles that you face that you would think is similar to a cisgender person that could have experienced those same things?
I mean, we live in a cisgender. I mean, when you say cisgender, you say cisgender and
So,
heterosexual.
so in heterosexual norms, yep.
Okay. So, because I was gonna say we're technically
You're
cisgender, so
cisgender, yeah.
it's like I was gonna say that was all the same, but not yeah. So, but even still, like with cisgender hetero people, like we exist in the same world as them, so like
Yeah.
everything overlaps. I think that's
Mm.
what's so interesting is like there's some assumption that our lives aren't overlapping with their lives, but it's like literally every system is built for you. We
Right.
have to navigate your system, so every single thing that you do, we have to go through. We just have an additional layer of oppression or multiple.
Multiple layers.
Layers depending on what your intersections are and depending on how you perform in your identity, right? Because I identify as non-binary, but there are some people who when they say they're non-binary they perform it a different way, or people who are
Mm.
gender non-conforming, they perform it a different way, and so it looks different, which means there are additional struggles that come with that.
Right.
So I always say to cishet people, like, literally, I'm in the fraternity with you.
Mm.
I get shot, I can get shot by the police just like you get shot by the police. Like, I mean, I
Right.
hate to break it down like those type of terms, but it's
But
like,
it's true.
realistically, I'm still Black. And so I go through every single thing that you go through as a Black man simply because I am also Black and male presenting.
Right.
So, nobody is interrogating like my other things when they first
Right.
see me, right?
Right.
And so for that community, I always encourage them to understand that they do not exist in a vacuum. Like you
Mm.
exist with us, and we are already included and part of this.
Right.
So when we are telling you about our identity, is not to put our identity ahead of anything. And even if it was, so what? At this point, people are tired of like having to explain over and over and over again that we literally are a part of this community too. Like,
Right.
and we are not looking to be added into something we already exist in. And we
Right.
exist in every single space and every single facet. We're at your jobs, we're in sports, even if we're not quote unquote known,
Yeah.
in our queer identity in sports, we're there. We're in every single thing. And so at some point, they need to learn how to recognize that and adapt.
Do you feel like the community has a responsibility to teach? I won't say make feel comfortable, because I feel like I don't agree with that. We shouldn't make anybody feel comfortable or anything around anyone. But for the community, should we take a more active role in that education, or letting people know about, don't call me, use this particular pronoun, don't use this one, but not necessarily get upset expecting someone to already know? Because I feel sometimes that you can have that kind of issue where don't everybody is supposed to think that you speak in a certain type of way, everybody needs to use a particular vernacular, but it's not always the case. It's still new to people, especially I want to say it's new to people, new to it being in such a public way, for people now are expressing the fact that I want to be considered him, he, instead of something else. What do you think about the community's role in how they are communicating with other people outside of the community?
So when you say the community's role, you're speaking in terms of
LGBTQ. So yeah, the LGBTQ, yes, and their
community's role
responsibility
and our responsibility to teach them.
Do you think there's a responsibility to educate, or to speak to them about how we want to be spoken to or
Yeah.
addressed, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So the first thing I say is nobody is responsible to educate their oppressor.
Okay.
So that's just, you could just, I don't care how, like, we're all oppressors in some way, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's responsible to educate their oppressor, right?
Yep.
Number two, I think people need to learn that you don't get to choose how you receive the language from a person you're oppressing.
Right.
I think it's very, very easy for people to be like, well, if you don't talk to me this way, I'm not gonna listen. It's like, well, that doesn't work for me because you're killing me. So
Yeah.
you're literally
Right.
killing trans people, right? So
Right.
sorry if I'm not giving you, spoon feeding you as J. Cole requested, No Name do just a couple weeks ago. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because that is the request, and that is 2020. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Google is available. You
Right.
know, if y'all can mention the names of all these revolutionaries like Fred Hampton in your music and in your songs, y'all can talk about the Black Panthers, then maybe you should read some of the text, right? Maybe you
Right.
should read some Black feminist text like Audre Lorde, right? Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
should go out there and read up on Angela Davis, read up on some people then,
Right.
rather than expecting us to do all of the teaching, right? Because the
Right.
teaching's been there for decades, right?
Right.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
non-binary, gender non-conforming, pronouns, these are not new concepts. We
Mm-hmm.
learn about pronouns in the 2nd and 3rd grade. Like,
Mm-hmm.
literally, we start to learn pronouns in the 2nd and 3rd grade
Right.
about a he, him, a she, her, a they, them. The problem
Yep.
is what they're attached to.
Right.
Now, again, so that's one. I don't believe everybody's job is to educate. Now, some
Mm-hmm.
of us take it upon ourselves, like myself, to educate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind educating, but it needs to come from a space where, number one, it's a safe. I feel safe in doing the education, but number two, where the education is being receptive, right?
Okay.
You have a lot of people who just aren't receptive to even the notion that they may not be a he, him, right? And I'm talking about heterosexual people. They
Right.
actually do not know what they are because they have never had to think about what they are, most
Right.
of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why you end up with, like I always say, like, there are all these terms that have been created, right? So that people can kind of like skirt queer community without actually having to be queer.
Mm-hmm.
Heteroflexible, metrosexual, bromance. Like, all of these terms were literally
Right.
created just so men could find a way to show a little bit of side of either being effeminate or femininity or some type of closeness with other people, right? Unfortunately, that's what they do rather than doing the work and rather than educating themselves, right? Because the language is out there. Now, we always choose to educate simply because if we don't educate them, we can't get to liberation, right? Like, so many of us understand, like, all right, we got to do this work to educate you all. However, there are some people who are just have been just so abused by that community that they just have nothing left for them. And we have to respect that. Like, and they have to respect that, right? Like, after me going to the barbershop, I mean, I think just last year, there was someone who knew that I was queer, who's known my family for years and was still using the F word. So, so again, doing that work becomes draining because at some point it just becomes toxic because at some point, you know, what you're saying is offensive to me. Like, you literally know that and you choose to do this anyway. So why do I keep burdening myself with that type of work? When there were other people in the barbershop who knew it was wrong, they waited till I left to say something, which I appreciate you saying something, but now we got to work to you addressing things.
Addressing it right then and there.
Heterosexual. I also feel there are enough heterosexuals to teach other heterosexuals at this point. Like, if everybody can be an ally, everybody can be an advocate, then y'all got to do that work too. Like, it shouldn't be on us to do that work.
Right. No, you're right. And I think I always, I challenge my friends all the time when it's like, if you're hearing something wrong, you need to say something, or I'll be the first one to check my friends, it's not right if you say that or, whatever the case may be. So I definitely think there is a conversation that needs to be had within your particular group because that's how it moves and how it multiplies, So, you talk about, growing up in an experience, being queer, what type of advice would you give to parents who have a queer child?
The first piece of advice I always give is to ask questions. Like, your child also doesn't know what the hell is going on. So, like, you got to ask them, like, there's like, it's weird almost in a sense, like, a child tells you, like, I'm this, and then the parents get upset. It's like, what are you exactly upset about? Like, your child is just trying to tell you this is what I feel like. You need to just be asking questions to figure out why they feel this way and what's going on inside of them that has them feeling this way, right?
Right.
So the first thing is to ask and not assume. Like, there's always a lot of assumptions that your child automatically has the language and everything to teach you, to tell you. They're going through a change just like you're trying to figure out what they're going through. They're trying to figure out what their own selves are going through, right?
Right.
The other thing I always say is, like, your job as a parent is to nurture at the end of the day. It is not to, like, you don't get to make the decisions of, like, what your child ends up being. Like when you made the decision to become a parent, you made the decision to become a parent, not the decision to become a parent to a heterosexual child. You don't have that power. That you do not have that power, right? You do not have that power to tell that child what gender they are. You don't have the power to tell that child what sexuality they want to identify as. That is not in your control. You literally made the decision that you were going to have a human being, and that human being was then going to turn out however that human being was going to turn out, and it is your job to nurture that human being. That's it, point blank, period. I need parents to go back to the simplistic form of what it was, the decision that they made when they decided to have a child. Now, if you decided that you were going to have a heterosexual child, or you were going to take care of a heterosexual child, well, that was the problem to begin with, because that was something you could not make the decision on. And so I'm always teaching parents that, like, you got to start from the beginning sometimes. Like, well, what did you think when you decided to have a child? What did you actually think? Like, did you actually go into it thinking your child was just going to be this? And weren't prepared at all for if your child was going to have a gender or a different gender or a different identity. You know what I'm saying? And so I treat it like that. Because there's no such thing as like a perfect child, right? And everybody always, like, when they go to, oh, my child, everybody always say like, oh, I just want a healthy baby. It's like, but you say that, but that's not the truth, right? Because you subconsciously, you also don't want a gay child. You don't want a trans child. You don't want a queer child. You don't want any of those things. So like, you need to actually do that work to say, when you say you just want a healthy baby, your baby coming out and identifying as a lesbian at the age of 14 doesn't change the fact that you had a healthy baby. So that's the type of work that they need to do. You know, ask, not assume, and also decolonize that whole thought process around the fact that you feel you almost feel owed by the world that your child comes out heterosexual. Like, nobody owes that to you.
I think, and it's also, and I also think it's as simple as, like, for instance, my parents, both, I say this all the time, they're both, immigrants, and they come in, oh, my kid is going to be a lawyer. Oh, you're going to be a lawyer. You have no choice or whatever. And then when I'm no longer a lawyer, am I not your kid no more because I'm not a lawyer? You know what I mean? Like, you have this, and I understand it. I understand that parents have this life that they think for their kids. I want my kids to be, good, making money, not have no issues, not whatever. But when it doesn't happen, to your point, how are you now upset? How have you not been able to, now you just have to change your mindset. This is not what this person has now become. You know what I mean? So this is definitely hitting it on the nail for sure. In terms of your support system, so growing up, what was that like for you? In terms of like, who was in your life? Who was your support system?
I mean, I always had my family, so I was fortunate. I grew up, I had both my parents, but both my parents worked. So I primarily was with my grandmother, me and my younger brother. She also took care of my two older cousins, Roland and Rasul. So it was primarily the four of us with her all the time. So I got to grow up with three heterosexual boys who didn't see my identity as anything like to be ashamed of. Like they call me by my middle name, which is Matthew, but they call me Matt. And so they only saw me as Matt. And they even said that today. They was like, well, we didn't see all we saw was Matt. And you could play baseball, you played football, like you ran track, like you were one of us. So like we saw it, but it didn't bother us. Like, because we were there to protect you and be cool with you. I also had my grandmother, Nanny, who was, kind of like the center, the matriarch, that very old school Southern Black grandmother that really but very keen on what was going on with me, knew about, trans people, knew about queer people, we've had queer people in the family before I was born. So she already was ready for whatever the world had, was going to place in our family, so to speak. And so that was I had my mom, my dad, my aunt Sarah, my aunt Munch, my uncle Raul, my uncle Kevin. So like that was like primarily like my core group of family that I always had to support me. And I mean, literally, as long as they're still alive, they still support me. Like I talk to my uncle, I talk to my mom and them every day. We have a group chat. They're very involved in this process, very involved in the book. everything going on with me career-wise. I talk to them all the time about all of that type of stuff. So yeah, but again, as I said, like some of the things I may do, how I may present, you know, it may make them uncomfortable at times because it's just so different from you know what the norm is, the norm, quote unquote, that society has created for them to think. But at the end of the day, they know it's me, so they're not bothered by it, or they try and learn, they try and ask questions, they try and grow to get to that place where it doesn't bother them that way. So I think more people just need to do that, like, you know. And again, you oftentimes will see like many queer people who have great relationships with their moms or their dads, like especially like on Father's Day, like when you see like queer people posting pics of their dads, it's always like a really good sign of like maybe we're moving in the right direction. I know it takes people time because of how society has colonized us to act and treat people, but I honestly do think, you know, once you kind of get past whatever that uncomfortable is that was created by outside forces primarily, you just have to love on your child, and at the end of the day, you can end up having a really, really amazing relationship.
So you talk about, you know, your family, which was very supportive. You know, Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, you know, they're super supportive of their daughter, and like that's amazing. But then you also have certain people who have, you know, make comments or having conversations about other people's family and things like that, and spreading that toxic masculinity, as I like to call it, and hate. What is your thoughts on those type of people and their ability? Everybody has an opinion, but it just seems that people who are not, this has nothing to do with you, y'all continue to have these type of conversations. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like a lot of it, of course, is homophobia, transphobia, but a lot of it is also built in misogyny. And so it's like there's a hatred of women. So, you know, that hatred of women, then the byproduct of that becomes the hatred of trans people and trans women. And it also becomes the hatred of queer men who, for all intents and purposes, heterosexual men oftentimes deem as woman or effeminizing the image of men. I'll be honest, a lot of times I'm not sure what their biggest, like they bring us up more than we bring them up. So I don't know 100% of the time. I'm not 100% sure. I actually do think primarily it rests in the fact that that many heteros, and this is women included, hetero black women, hetero black men, they don't explore sexuality. So because they don't explore it, I think that at times there is a freedom that they see us have that they envy or that they can be jealous of. I say that because you oftentimes, when you see some of the like the bigger Instagram accounts, especially from like the men, like the comedians, what are they primarily doing? They're usually faking being a black woman, or they're usually putting on a wig, or they're usually doing that, but they're doing that because that's their way to express what they truly, the effeminate feelings that they probably truly have somewhere and can't express without being called the F word, can't express without people questioning their sexuality, so they do it through comedy, right? I've always felt like people have, like men in particular, they always do that, especially like when you see like groups of boys together and they're doing things that are kind of like homoerotic. And it's like, well, what do y'all view that as, right? But at the end of the day, what it really is like, they don't even know how to hug each other. Like, they don't even know how to care for each other in a way that wouldn't question their whole manhood and their whole sexuality, or they don't think that would lead to some type of violence. And so I think when they see our community in the way we are much freer in many ways, and in the way we get to express ourselves, in the way we get to tell our truth, the way we get to live in our truth. I think there's something there that bothers them a lot. And again, I think societal conditioning, right? Like it's extremely hard to be black. Like it's just always been extremely hard to be a black person, right? And so a lot of people assimilate to respectability because they think that's at least the safest way for them to survive this. So when they see those of us who kind of chuck respectability out the window, part of it is this fear. Like, well, y'all are gonna get us harmed by the oppressor, almost, right? Y'all are gonna get us harmed by that society if y'all are so free with what y'all are doing, because they only can see a pathway through respecting being But for them, it's more so, again, like, it's more so breaking down like where that comes from, like where that cringe comes from when you see men twerking or when you see this happening, right? Like what bothers you so much about it, right? And you'll oftentimes, especially with me, I talk to a lot of heterosexual men who are struggling with their identity. I've been doing that for years. Being in the fraternity, I've had so many heterosexual fraternity brothers who at least have been willing to have a conversation about whether they were sexually abused as a child, have a conversation about the fact that every now and then they are turned on by a man. Because it's real. It's like, y'all, like, I say it all the time, like, we are not as, like, the queer community identified is small, but the amount of people that do that have sex with queer people is large. So you know, the amount of heterosexual people that also have sex with queer people while still identifying as heterosexual is much larger than anybody would ever believe. And so that is kind of like the work that we have to do is like, well, how do we even create a space where heterosexual men and women can at least explore identity and sexuality without
and not feeling
being so fearful that it leads to death? Because that's really what it is. Like, there's a fear. Like, the fear is so large that it leads to death, right? That leads to the death of the person that you probably love. But that just happened to be queer, and there's that fear of you being outcasted. And it's almost like, well, the only way to win my manhood back is by killing this person that I love. It's a very, 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 very cyclical, interesting cycle of violence that happens with that.
It's crazy. So two things. One is you know how many people have probably missed out on their soulmate because of some type of societal norms, or you can't be with this person or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? Like, if you just think about that as you just liking someone, whoever that person is, or caring for someone or whatever, but you can't express that or whatever the case may be, is so large. The second thing you said is, I say this all the time, especially as someone that, you know, has a media platform for men. You know, my media platform is for men, regardless of what you identify as, regardless of, you know, what your sexuality is or anything like that. We have content, we produce content for everybody, just Black men. But I always say that, and I want to get your take on this, that women have really been able to go so far. Black women have been able to go so far because they have been able to galvanize. They've been able to come together, and there's not, you know, you can talk about the cattiness or whatever, but for the most part, they network and they have events. They do all of this type of stuff. If you gay, bisexual, Black, they don't care. They go out about, they'll still break bread with you. They'll still send you, you know, work if you need help, whatever the case may be. It's not like that for Black men. When it comes to, you know, a queer Black man and a heterosexual Black man, for some reason, you have this, we can't be friends because, you know, maybe this girl may think that I'm gay because I'm hanging out with you, or maybe you're trying to come on to me, or whatever. There's so many various things that go on. But what's your thoughts on that relationship between queer Black men and straight Black men, or heterosexual Black men?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you kind of said 2 points that are very interesting because they're a little contradictory, right? Because it's like, in one breath, you're like, women don't care about the queer stuff
within their community, meaning that Black women, if they're talking about them being gay, if there's another Black woman who is gay talking to another like a heterosexual Black woman and a gay Black woman, I feel like they're okay. There was no issues with a hetero Black woman being friends with a queer Black woman.
Oh, but there is. I mean, you know.
But
like,
so you think there is? It's huge.
I mean,
go ahead.
we like, listen. You know, trans women have been fighting to prove that they are women for too long,
right?
And most of it is because there are Black women who try to deny them womanhood in many ways, but also, like you said, the other side of that is you oftentimes have where a Black man is fearful that if he is friends with a queer man, then Black women will shame him. So,
Right.
so you know, as much as we want to believe that I will say, like, you can have Black women that usually are friends to queer people, but also date homophobes. So
Wow.
that is something that is not. I don't want to say not non-existent. That's not normal. Like, that's actually
Right.
more normal, that you typically will have friends or women in your life
Right.
that actively date and marry homophobes. Like,
Right.
you know, it gets really, really interesting, those type of relationships at
Right.
times.
Right.
I think part of the issue is, though, like you said, when you have the whole queer Black men and heterosexual Black men. I have heterosexual friends. It just took a while, but it took a while because oftentimes they would get questioned by their girlfriends of why they were hanging with me, right?
Right.
So you had that. I think you also do have the notion that we'll hit on them or we'll be attracted to them or whatever. But I think, again, that speaks more to whether they're comfortable in their own sexuality than it does anything else. What I tell them all the time, because when I was having a going away in DC, and one of my straight frat brothers actually came. And it was funny because he called me about 2 weeks ago. And he was like, that was the funnest time he had ever been out in his life. And he was like, what was so fun about it was like, yeah, they was hitting on me or they was complimenting. He was like, but that's all they were doing. Like, they weren't bothering me. They weren't like pushing up on me. They weren't doing nothing. And he was like, in my mind, though, I had built up, if I ever went in that space or went in a space with a bunch of queer people or whatever, that it would be like some like attack on me or like some like harm to my manhood or like, and he was like, y'all are just regular. He like, y'all go, he was like, y'all actually go to the club and talk and chill and drink. Like, y'all be at the bar having real conversations. Y'all be at the bar, then y'all dance and y'all. He's like, you go to the heterosexual clubs and they don't do the same thing. Like,
everybody trying to be cute. Everyone's
cool,
look cute.
or like, he was like, it's not even like this. So he was like, it was like just a really, really good experience. But I always say to straight Black men, like, listen, like, my whole family is full of straight cousins and all kind of stuff. Like, I just exist with them. Like, we have the same conversations, the same type of politics happen, the same type of everything. The only difference is the way we choose, or not choose. Well, I would say choose, because there's a whole issue with when people call it a lifestyle. Like, this is not a lifestyle. This is a life. Now, the lifestyle I may choose may be how I perform, how I show my identity, but this is my life. Being queer is my life. It is intersected within me being Black. And I think a lot of times we have to teach hetero men, like, listen, like, this is part of my identity. It's not some separate entity, some separate thing. I know, partying with the straights. It's not some separate thing, you know what I mean? And so for them, a lot of it, though, is built in this image of effeminizing men, and them having this fear that men are becoming too effeminate, and we can't have our boys becoming that. It's like, listen, if your son is that, your son is that. If your son is not that, your son is not that. That's just that, right? And again, what happens is we harm young Black children, especially Black boys specifically, because we don't give them the opportunity to dream. Like, we literally, like, there's a reason that you don't have a bunch of heterosexual, like, you got a whole bunch of Black men that are barbers, but why are they not beauticians? If you can cut hair, you can do hair, right? Like, my uncle did hair. My uncle used to perm hair. My uncle was a beautician and a barber. Married twice. Like, so it's kind of interesting how, like, we've even like gendered who could do each other's hair, right? And who could do these type of things. It's like, what we actually are doing, though, is we are literally taking dreams away from little Black boys. If you should be able to be heterosexual and be a fashion designer, there should be no problem with that, right? You should be able to be heterosexual and be a costume designer. You should be able to be heterosexual and do makeup. Do you know what I mean? And it is really, 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 really sad and unfortunate of how we have stolen and robbed so many dreams of just little Black boys because of trying to protect some image, an image that won't protect us or save us, an image that has never protected us. Because that's the ultimate thing, is like, there's like this belief that if we become the respectable Negro, we will be saved. But the thing that as a respectable Negro,
Right.
The Negro has never been respected in this country.
Right.
So you
Right.
can't even create that type of image because it's not respected to be Black, it's to be disrespected. And so that is where my work comes in, to try and push people to understand that we just have to operate how we operate.
Right.
And they just gonna have to get with it.
They had to get with it.
But
Right.
to do and move with the hopes in a way that they will respect us makes absolutely no sense after 401 years of coming off that boat. So
you started leaning into again just the disrespect and the conversation around Black Lives Matter, and we know that it's clearly an issue. But what's your and I know you touched a little bit on it, but where are we at with this conversation within the Black community about all Black Lives Matter and how important it is for everyone to be fighting for everyone? You know what I mean?
yeah, somebody's asking a question about the book and Gabrielle Union. What do I want to cable network? Cable network only because I don't like how streaming drops all the episodes at the same time. I don't mind if it goes to streaming, but I would just hope that we could maybe dump episodes like two.
But some of the Apple Plus does that.
Yeah, some of them are doing that. So
yeah.
as long as we could drop the episode, I just want to have like a finale moment. Like I don't want everybody just to be able to just look at it all together. So the current status is it's still very, very, very early stages. COVID is happening, so it's not a lot moving, and so we are looking for a co-writer to co-write the pilot with me. So that's where we're at with it. But I know what the idea is and where it's going to go. I'm just not going to say all that yet because we got stuff to work on. In terms of all Black Lives Mattering, it's almost absurd that we have to say that. I just don't understand how you can say Black Lives Matter and then start to like be like, but wait, but no. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is really, really all or nothing. Like, so the whole notion of all Black Lives Mattering is simply because like we're literally having to fight a fight against our own people in many ways. And it's like, how did we get here? When you think about the fact that, and I say it all the time, everybody marches when it's a Black man. Everybody. Not for some reason, because of how we're conditioned, we all see our salvation and safety, and we see leader and we see power in the image of the Black man, right? It is why we hear more about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X than we ever hear about Angela Davis and Fannie Lou Hamer, right? It is that is literally why, because there is a belief in our community that whatever liberation looks like, it will be led by a heterosexual Black man.
Right.
Unfortunately, when you then start to look at, who marches for the Breonna Taylor, right? You get a good amount of people, but some Black men ain't gonna stand up for that, right? That's because of sexism, because of misogyny, right?
Yep.
Then you get to queer people. We may get a good old queer march going, right?
Right.
But then you get to trans people, and now we talk about a vigil. We talk about just struggling to even get their story out there, just struggling to even keep their name in the press, right? Like they become misgendered, they become disposable. People like me become disposable. And so when we get into like this whole all Black Lives Mattering, it really is like, I hate to even say it, it's almost like a begging of the communities that sit above us to be like, listen, like nobody, first of all, like I am amongst Black people. When I am amongst Black people, the thing that others me is my queerness. So that is the reason that to you, it seems like I am putting something in front of my Blackness because you don't understand that your Blackness is inherently queer.
Right.
You think that Blackness to you looks inherently heterosexual. That is not Blackness. Blackness actually, it encompasses heterosexuality, but it also encompasses homosexuality.
Right.
It encompasses trans people. It encompasses queer people. It encompasses the disabled. It encompasses the poor. It encompasses the rich. We are all in this together. Blackness encompasses all of that.
Right.
So when you then start to say, well, you shouldn't be talking about your identity. Yes, I should be talking about my identity because my identity is Black. And my identity is Black queer. Right. Just like your identity is Black man and your identity is Black woman. And my identity, I have multiple identifiers.
Right.
And unless you want to walk around pretending like white people do with the whole I don't see color,
right.
then then you're doing exactly, you're just, you know, trying to dismantle the oppressor's house using the oppressor's tools. Like,
Right.
none of that makes any sense to me, because literally when they say I don't see color, that means they don't see you. So when you say I have to be black first, or we all got to be black only, or what, that means you don't see me. You know, you see a piece of me, and you want me to exist as a piece of me.
Right.
A black woman cannot exist as just a black person. She is a black woman, and you will treat her differently because she is a black woman. I cannot just exist as a black person. I have to exist as a black queer person because of how I perform, and because of how I exist in the world, and because of my mannerisms and the way I talk and the way I move and the way I dress. You are going to treat me differently. So you cannot even pretend that I can show up in a room and be just this one thing first, or that the Black Lives Mattering has to look like one monolithic thing, because we are not a monolith. And so that's realistically why many of us are having to yell all Black Lives Matter, because people, for some reason, those who have more power and more privilege, more access within our community, oftentimes like to forget the fact that they're oppressors too, and that they oftentimes make bodies that don't move and navigate like them just as disposable as white people do all of our bodies.
Right. No, that's definitely true. And I even, you know, Juneteenth was huge this year. Super, super huge. But does that change? You know, is that like, what is that enough? What does change look like? Is it, now that we're hyped, Juneteenth, you no longer July 4th, we don't care about that anymore. What do you think is change?
Change is action. I always say that. Like, change has to look like an action, not a celebration. Like, we can celebrate Juneteenth, but what is the actionable items that are coming out of that, right? Giving us the day off, that's cute. That's symbolic, though. Symbolism has always been used as a way to, like, to appease Black folks, right? It's like, we'll give them a holiday. We'll give them it's like, no, right? Like, well, what action looks like is Black kids not having to go to schools named after slave owners. Like, what action is pulling down the monuments of our oppressors, right? It's like, kids in Germany are not going to Hitler High. Like, why am I going to why am I going to Lee Davis High? Why am I going to Stonewall Jackson High? Why am I going to schools where people literally were fighting for me to not be human? We're fighting for me to remain property, and I have to go to a school named after them. And I have to perform and gig for this, right? That to me is absolutely absurd. So it needs to look like an action, right? And those actions look like policies that benefit Black lives. Those actions look like defunding and abolishing the police. Those actions look like, you know, releasing inmates, like, you know, starting to like work on like the mass incarceration issue that we have in this country. Those actions have to look like more than painting Black Lives Matter in the middle of the street as like a symbol. It's like, thank you, we didn't ask for that, right? That's
You didn't like your Congress sitting inside with the kente cloths kneeling? That wasn't enough for you?
You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's almost absurd that that's what white people think solidarity looks like. Solidarity does not look anything like performative, like a performance or anything. It looks like it's actionable change, right? So it looks like reparations. It looks like, right? Because like, oh, so y'all can get reparations because you cut a stimulus check for every single American. So the purse can open up to actually pay Black people what they are owed, the debt that this country owes to them. But reparations also doesn't just look like a check, right? It looks like a check, but then it looks like the gap closing with equity. It looks like, hey Jordan, it looks like it looks like all of those things, right? It looks like abolition. It looks like ending, or like, again, it just does not look like symbolism. So you know, thank you for the holiday off because we're gonna take it. So thank you for all of that. You know what I'm saying? But
Yep.
also, I need you to, again, like abolish
Do the work.
just some of these things. And again, like macro, micro abolition. Like I think about like those type of things a lot of times because it's like, you know, major abolition does look like defunding and abolishing the police, getting rid of prisons, like realistically getting rid of the Constitution. It was written while we were slaves, getting rid of the Star Spangled Banner. It was written by American-owned slaves. Like those are like really, really, you know, people are like, but what do you mean get rid of it? Like these documents cannot serve us because these documents were written when we weren't even people. We were property, right? But then even micro level, like I said, it looks like taking at least the damn monuments down to the damn slave owners, taking the slave box, like, you know, burning all the plantations, like for real, you know what I mean? Like giving the property back, like not allowing plantations to even exist as these museums and all that, like burning all of that down. Like that's what it actually has to look like for me, because it can't look like symbolism anymore. And I think, you know, we get caught up in symbolism. What I am glad to see is that people have continued to protest and people continue to fight and are not allowing the symbolism to stop us. But but yeah, again, someone just mentioned, I just think like now, like for us, it's like, what is your like macro level abolition look like, but what does your micro look like? And then what does your daily abolition look like, right? I read a really, really good article in Vogue about Tourmaline, who was talking about what freedom dreaming is. And basically like, it's almost like there's a fear when I walk out my house sometimes, right? Because I perform as a queer person, right? But abolishing that fear sometimes looks like me having blonde hair, because that's something that I know makes me stand out, but I know it makes me me. But abolishing those things and waking up in like that type of freedom and in that type of like liberatory aspect is abolishing how my mind was conditioned, right, around certain things. And so I think all of us have to start teaching and working through a lot of that type of stuff. But I feel like we're getting there, because I feel like people didn't get stuck in the symbolism of what Juneteenth was. I think people are like, okay, well, but give us more, right? We've even gotten cops out of some of the schools already. Keep going. We don't need no cops in schools. Get them all out, right? Like, so that's what I think it has to look like.
That's what change looks like. So I got 100 more questions, but I know they're gonna kick us out. So we're gonna have a part 2. But before we go, I do want you to talk. You already talked about a little bit about the show and stuff like that. But what is next for George? About to say George Washington. Don't kill me. George Johnson. That was your fault. You did that. Talking about all these oppressions.
I'm like, what's next for George Washington? I hope is the tearing down of Mount Rushmore.
Everything down.
And you know, history books mentioning he was a slave owner too, and not making him this hero and forefather.
But it's also, and I think too, and I'm gonna stop. But it's like also think about what are we teaching in our schools? Like I need you guys to rewrite these history books. I want you to teach my kids the true history, where we are, where we came from, and stop leaving out the Black people and the things that they have done, and stop just giving them the little ones, your Harriet Tubmans, your Rosa Parks. Give me everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but again, I think that's another system that has to be abolished is K through 12. I mean, just the way it's set up, you got white people teaching Black people the history of white people. So of course they're gonna try and like, you know, erase their guilt and erase, you know what I mean, and do that, right? So part of it is changing the curriculum, but part of it is also teaching Black families that when your child comes home, you have to start giving them the text. We have text. We have Morrison. We have you know, Nikki Giovanni, we got Audre Lorde, we got tons of texts. We got texts that even I'm still learning, right? Like of really, really great Black philosophers that weren't just the texts that white people felt comfortable enough for us to learn. So we have to push ourselves to learning that other text that's out there, right? Angela Davis is like, everybody needs to just start reading Angela, right? We just got to start reading more, and we got to start making sure we're putting that in the hands of our children when they come home, because we know school systems ain't gonna give it to them. So when you talk about what I'm working on, I guess that kind of goes into what I'm working on, right? Like my first book talked about Black queerness and gender identity and all of those things. Working on a Stonewall graphic novel, because that's another story that's Black history. Stonewall is Black history, and it's been stolen from us, whitewashed multiple times, and I'm now going to reclaim that in several ways, but telling the story correctly first. I have another book I'm working on. The announcement hasn't come out yet, but the announcement should be out either tomorrow or next week. But I'm also working on another book
Nice.
that will, introduce people even more to my grandmother, and just growing up and what Black boyhood was like, and like the liberatory ways that we were able to express ourselves, and kind of like how my grandmother wasn't one for roles and norms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was very big on just like, I don't care about that type of stuff. Like, we're not doing the whole, well, y'all boys, so y'all don't even know how to cook. And
Right.
She was not that type of person.
Right.
And then I'm also working on the TV show adaptation of the first book.
Nice.
So, that's pretty much what's going on with me. And I have something else that I'm working on, but we can't talk about it yet because it's very, very early stages and we just submitted it. So,
okay.
But fingers crossed, everything goes according to the plan, and it'll be a very big announcement within the next couple of months. But yes.
Perfect, man. I'm so happy for you. I love hearing your story. I love seeing Black men doing what they need to do and just continue to be great and excellent. So thank you so much for jumping on this with us. We definitely appreciate it. Guys, thank you for joining in on our mocktails conversation. Make sure you guys pick up the book, All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson. Please pick it up. Great read. I'm going to go ahead and get one. I think we're getting a book. I'm buying a book, and I'm buying a book and I'm giving it away. So you guys, if y'all go back on this live on our website, you guys can enter to win, because I'm going to go ahead and make sure that somebody gets a copy. So guys, thank you so much. George, again, thank you so much. And have a good night.
You too. Thank you all for allowing me. This was great.
See you later.
All right.